Hi everyone, welcome. This is my bench where I usually work on my worm bins, and I'm gonna go grab my worm bin from the shelf over there. It's actually the one that my finger is pointing to. It's the bin of red wigglers that's 82 days of age at this point. That used to actually live outside. It was just 29 days ago that that system came indoors, and that system came indoors with its accompanying cocoon nursery, which is actually that box on the floor, and those are the two bins I'm checking, and I'm just gonna take care of getting rid of some of this stuff here. I was just trying to see if I could use some old coffee out of those two coffee filters right there to try to sort of stain the backdrop for this piece of wood that I hang the plastic see-through container on that I shoot some of my time lapses in. It just seemed to me like the material was a little bit too bright, a little light in color, and I thought if I can come up with some natural way of dyeing it, making it darker in color, then maybe with coffee I can accomplish that. So really quick, it was 7 days ago when we finally did what we considered to be the last haul out of worms out of the baiting station of that cocoon nursery. There had been one other haul out 21 days ago. So 3 weeks ago and 1 week ago, we did two extractions of worms and moving those worms over into the adult bin. And the adult bin is has been sitting here for about a week. Yeah, 1 week since that last check-in. So besides moving worms over a week ago, the bin was also fed. So I'm just curious to see how the food's coming along after a week's time, especially with the added babies that we moved over last week. And if it needs some more food today, we'll add some. Well, you know what? As usual, we'll probably add some whether it needs it or not. So I'm going to get the bin up on the bench, take a look, and oh yeah, one other little bit of unfinished business. Even though I officially treated the migration of the worms out of the cocoon nursery down here as complete after 80 days a week ago, I did actually place a little chunk of melon in there. I figured if there's any stragglers, maybe they'll collect around that piece of melon. So maybe we'll first check in there to see if we did actually round up any straggler worms, and if we did, we can just put them into their new home once we get to the adult bin to feed it. All right, let's get going. So in here, this bin that I had referred to earlier as the cocoon nursery, just really quick, the whole concept behind that is that once your worm bin is finished, or your worm bag in this case, it was the outdoor worm bag that was treated as finished, and once you haul all the adult worms out, if what you're left with is this really nice fine worm castings material, your immediate tendency in a lot of cases might be to just grab the compost and use it out in your garden. But there's also this sort of underlying consideration to take into account the potential of the material still being pretty heavily populated with maybe baby worms that didn't make their way out with the migration process that you had facilitated, or maybe even just cocoons left behind by the worms, which have yet to hatch. So that's the whole concept behind given what appears to be a batch of evacuated compost time to sort of potentially mature to the point where baby worms actually are born and can be rounded up. Right away, you probably saw the same things I saw, which was the presence of a few baby worms right out on the surface. The piece of wood that was sitting out here on top is just something that the moisture is unable to pass through and evaporates, or it sort of just sits there and continues to condense down up on the wood and drop back into the bin, creating a little extra moisture in the bin here down the middle section where the wood covered things up. So that's not too surprising to find worms hanging out in that stuff, because they do need the moisture to be able to breathe through their skin. I can't remember, I don't think it was placed very deep down into the bed. I think I just dug a couple inches, pretty much smack in the middle, to position that piece of melon. But I just figured I would stall there for a second to look across the surface here of tilled up material, see if I spot any movement. All right, I think we're getting down to where the melon may have been. I'm seeing something a little bit chunky. I laid it on top of a piece of cardboard, paper or whatever. Trying to make it easy to scoop out later, like we just did there. I'm doing this kind of wholesale mode. I'm not picking and choosing. I just figured I'd grab the entire little package and bring it out. But you know what we'll do is we'll continue excavating down below where the food was, because that yummy moisture of the melon dripping downward does sort of make sense that right beneath it there could be some worms taking advantage of the moisture and the sugar dripping down. So I don't know, I'll probably miss some worms out here in this material. So I'm sort of expecting the worms that we are hunting for to be sort of small babies. This is kind of a juvenile bin, if anything, baby bin. But maybe at some point we can actually consider this material as depopulated. That's really what I'd like to be able to do at some point soon. Yeah, look at that. We got ourselves quite a number of worms here. More than I expected. I didn't think we'd see so many. A couple of them were even a little bit bigger than I thought they'd be. I don't even remember. This is not even melon. I'm sorry, I was misremembering there. Now I'm noticing that this outer piece is the peel of the banana. So we just had like the very butt end of the banana, not the stem end. That's the other end. This is the end where the little flower is. The worms kind of, some of them have made themselves pretty at home within the banana, and other ones were just kind of hanging around in the bedding surrounding things there. But you know, I don't know if I should continue this process and this material. Is it possible that there's maybe still many worms in this stuff that could potentially come together again? It does seem realistic, and I'm in no hurry. I don't need these castings right away. At some point they'll be really nice. Some plant's really going to appreciate them, that's for sure. Really nice batch of castings. But in a way, I just feel like a little bit of combing through the material and suddenly, boom, there's another worm. It just seems like, you know, when you're looking for stuff in this kind of material, it just seems so easy to miss stuff. So I'm not objecting to giving this a little bit more time, sort of on the side. I'm not tracking it in my tracking system. It's not in my spreadsheet. Very informally, though, here in the videos, we can just talk about it, that it's been 1 week of just baiting with a piece of banana and a little couple chunks of paper. And we were able to round up a good number of worms here, it seems. I guess we'll evict them from these materials that made up our fairly efficient baiting area. And we'll just rebuild using the same stuff. We'll just bring worms over only. None of the stuff that they're hanging out on. It would be nice to bring as many of them over and not return them to the bin. But this does seem to me like something that can probably do a really good job continuing to... Thought I got that worm. Did I? This banana, I think, will continue doing a really good job rounding up worms for us. Well into another week for sure. No problem. So let's just see what else is in here that... I don't know if there's some... Oh, there he is. I thought I saw a worm over here sticking its little head out. Oh, but I actually got 2 for 1? I had 2 on my glove there. There's probably a couple more left in this piece of banana, but I'm not going to sweat it. We'll just leave them be, because we will be back in here to try to round up whatever remains as far as straggler worms. And we'll let these little guys loose. probably got a good couple dozen worms in here, right? So, as usual, let me know what you think. How many worms do you think we rounded up there in that last little rogue attempt at bringing worms over? Yeah, write your guesses in the comments section, and I'll certainly update the guesstimate for how many worms our system has in it. But before we can get that system out here to check it out, we've got to get this set back up and back to work. And I guess in another week or whatever time frame it is that we come back to check on the adult bin, we'll see if we've succeeded in rounding up any more. Maybe a couple more, maybe another couple dozen more, who knows. It'll be interesting to see what we end up with here. Oops, wow. This piece of cardboard is really falling to pieces. Almost wondering if it makes sense to try to put it back where it was. Maybe at this point it's better to just leave it out, otherwise it's going to end up falling apart into little fragments and littering the nice finished compost. We'll bring this over to the adult bin as well. Use it as nice broken in bedding material. And we'll just cover up with that piece of wood down the middle. How does that sound? Yeah, the wood alone will be the main cover at this point, because that other piece that we put on top of this that's covered in plastic actually does get a little bit of airflow right below it, just because of the fact that it's so high up. It's a pretty thick piece of plywood, so that's fine. It'll just let the surface dry a little bit, and we'll see what we end up with here in a couple more weeks. So let's go get the adult bin and see what's happening in there. I would almost feel bad feeding these guys coffee once again, because that's exactly what they got last week, and they got it in a great amount. They got 3 days worth of coffee last week. So 3 days worth, I mean, that means when I take one of these cone filters out of the coffee machine, it's the amount of coffee that made up that day's brewing that day's pot. So it was 3 of these with coffee in it. So I'd like to maybe give them something different. But then again, who knows? Maybe they really enjoyed the coffee, and giving them more is something they would really like. So we'll have to see how things went in here. There's this really huge gaping hole in the middle of this piece of newspaper. Makes me wonder if that would be useful as just bedding anymore too, rather than using it as top covering. It's a fast-moving worm. Every time I see a fast-moving worm like that, it makes me wonder what type of worm it is. This is supposed to be a red wiggler worm bin, but that somehow reminds me of a different type of worm. I do have a bin that has Indian blue worms in it. I might as well just toss this little guy over there. It's something that I guess I have to get used to, is having the Indian blues in my wormery means getting used to having them in almost all my worm bins. Because they get out of their own bin, and then they go cruising over into neighboring bins and end up all over the place. It's like here, you know, with that brighter tail there, that light colored tail, not to mention the slower movement, as you can see on that worm there too. Just the slower pace at which they move. The yellow color tail on both tells me that what we're seeing there is actually red wigglers. And here too, don't know what that is. The red wigglers as well as the blue worms, they're all pretty sensitive to the overhead lights, and they'll react. It's just that the speed at which you see them reacting is different based on which worm you're seeing. The food was, like I said before, 3. I just didn't even take the coffee out of the filters. I just took the 3 cone filters side by side, 1, 2, 3 in a row, and that was their feeding. But the reason I was interested in coming back in here in only a week's time, even though that was a pretty generous feeding, is because right on top of the coffee, I took a whole banana that I had cut open down the middle as if you were making a banana split, and I laid those two halves of the banana out here across the top. So, you know, if I were to wait a month, then there'd be probably certainly no sign of that banana anymore. But I was hoping that after only a week, we might be able to come back in here and find that the banana has become sort of a party spot for the worms to come together to. I mean, why else do you feed an entire banana? Not just to see it vanish, but hopefully to be able to come over and observe it being vanished with worms mobbing around it. I'm glad to see that this half of an avocado is finally getting some attention from the worms. I could see a few worms, a number of worms hanging out in it. There's another half somewhere in here nearby. During last week's feeding, we found that and the other one, wherever it is, right here, I guess. Yeah, okay. We found both of these as leftovers from, I believe, what had been just the previous feeding prior to that, perhaps another week prior. So it does take, evidently, at least my type of avocados that I got here, take a good couple weeks before they start becoming of interest to the worms in here. So this has to be one of the coffee filters and all the coffee that was in it. Some worms underneath and nearby. It's interesting because as I run my fingers through here, it does feel like I could sense a little, very faint bit of warmth, as if maybe all this nitrogen-rich stuff is kind of breaking down and kicking off some heat. Composting. It's certainly not like an uncomfortable hot heat. It's just something that you can almost sense as different, you know, something a little bit different. So there we go. You'll recognize what that is, right? It's the stem of a banana peel. So we found one portion of the half banana, the part that had the stem. So that's leftovers, but it's pretty stripped down. There should be another half of the banana floating around in here. Pretty good sized piece, similar to that. Maybe still has some slimy leftover banana on it that the worms are still enjoying. This is another coffee filter. And all the coffee inside this one still feels pretty, I don't know, intact or whatever you want to say. It doesn't seem like it's been eaten much. So this check-in does sort of tell me that there's plenty of leftovers here for these worms to continue nibbling on, as far as two halves of a banana that have not yet totally been eaten, that are a week old, and a couple halves of, as well as all this coffee. Well, this coffee's been in here for a week now. Plus these avocados that are a couple weeks old at this point. And whatever else is in here as leftovers from previous feedings. You can see a lot of these disc-shaped little objects. They're all the two, maybe even one or two seeds, avocado seeds that I had actually sliced up. So rather than placing them in here as a whole seed, I sliced the seed up into little pieces, and it starts to break down pretty quickly when it's like that. It becomes really crumbly and then gets eaten up. So just looking at what we've got here as far as leftovers, I mean, I'll add food. I'll admit I'm probably overdoing it here a little bit, because there's probably plenty in here for them already. But to me, it always seems like food's at different stages. These bits of leftovers are finally at the stage, especially like the avocado that seemed to have like no attention last week, is finally getting worms all over it, and it's getting eaten. The banana is, unsurprisingly, doing well. And whatever we put in here might only get the attention of the worms a couple weeks from now, but it needs that time to get infiltrated and start that breakdown process so the worms can take advantage of it. So I am going to run upstairs really quick, probably not grab too much, and then and I guess I will get rid of that pile of coffee in that tray too. So break time, I'll be right back. I started heading upstairs to go get some stuff out of the freezer for them, and I kept thinking to myself, it doesn't have to be a lot, and what we have here as far as coffee is already a fair amount, probably more than we need. And even the bedding, that comes along with the coffee, these two filters, and then I guess we were going to also reuse that piece of cardboard that fell apart that used to be the cover of the nursery bin. We'll recycle all that paper and cardboard in here too as extra bedding, so it'll be a pretty big time bedding feeding too. But I think the coffee we have here already is enough, so I don't have to take a run upstairs. We'll give them what we have here already. Help reduce the clutter down here in my wormery, and it's stuff that they should probably enjoy, and at least they're probably used to, because it's what they've been eating for the past week. But then again, you saw how this stuff was still kind of caught up in its filter. In a couple of the cases, we were able to pull the entire filter out, and all the coffee was still kind of blocked up down within the filter. Hopefully by putting it in this way, we can sort of spread it out a little bit better and make it all easier access so that worms can actually approach the coffee rather than the stuff just being sort of blocked up inside of a little cone filter. And maybe to make it even more interesting to them, we'll sprinkle in some broken up eggshells, pulverized to a really fine consistency. And the grit is something that the worms typically need anyway, so hopefully it's something that'll attract them to the coffee and then convince them to nibble away at the coffee that remains, as well as the coffee that we just added. So we'll get all this leftover coffee, leftover banana, leftover avocado. These leftover pieces of banana, I just have this funny feeling we're going to see no sign of those next time we come back in here, because they're coming along really good. The avocados, the shells will definitely bump into them, but who knows, maybe by next time we'll see a lot less of this, actually the meaty stuff within the avocados. It'd be nice to see that stuff start to get consumed as well. So let's get the feeding covered up here, and then we can proceed to the release of those couple worms that we brought over from the nursery. I don't know. How long do you think that nursery should continue with that remaining fragment of banana that I left in there? I don't think it's going to need a whole lot more time, and actually maybe the best thing to do is to just commit to going back in there to retrieve that piece of banana, see what happened, and then just base the decision on the outcome of that rounding up of worms, if any come together at all. So let's get these little guys into their new home and reunite them with all their friends and neighbors that left a week ago and 3 weeks ago. But we don't want to leave any of these little babies that are stuck to the plastic container behind either. They're such little shrimpy baby worms. I can easily see missing them, or even stuck to my glove. But it's not many. It's, maybe even more than I expected, but still not many. Pretty good little turnout. Mostly small worms, a lot of really small worms. Even the largest of them, I would say, are probably still juveniles, which is realistic. So let's let these guys get settled in, and we'll get things covered up once they're out of view. So I'll admit that I had hoped to see a little bit more of a worm party when we got in there and saw the banana. I mean, I'm glad to see that it was pretty nicely broken down. There was a good number of worms hanging out on it, but I was, in a way, hoping to see a little bit more. No big deal, though. It's always interesting to see what you see. I've got these two pieces of paper, both pretty heavily broken down at this point, but still in good enough shape to continue using it. Right underneath the plastic, sort of like the drop cloth onto which the condensing moisture that collects on the plastic can drop right down onto. The worms always seem to like it, and in time they'll probably see it all as very tempting material to nibble on, but I'm still seeing pretty sharp edges and stuff, even along these torn edges. Not a lot of deterioration yet, but pretty soon I'm sure the worms are going to start seeing that as a yummy meal to eat too. So just a word of disclosure about these two systems. Both systems, as you heard me mention earlier, originating outside and only coming indoors 29 days ago. I kind of knew that this material had been occupied by not just these worms, but by other things. Maybe some pill bugs, maybe some black soldier flies. And yesterday I actually did hear something like buzzing around in my lights. I thought it was a fly, you know, like a house fly, but it did turn out to be a black soldier fly. Must have crawled out of either this or out of the worm or out of the cocoon nursery, where there must have, you know, just been that, you know, that larvae waiting to transform into a fly. And I didn't really go out of my way to find them or pick them out or anything like that. In a way, though, I just always had this sort of expectation of that happening. I just never imagined that it would happen at a large enough scale. That's the only reason I proceeded with bringing outdoor stuff inside. If I thought it would become sort of a, you know, a swarm situation that I'd end up really regretting, then wouldn't have done it in the first place. But I think this is kind of a, you know, very few and far between. We might see a fly or two emerge out of this material, but I don't see enough fly action to see mating and egg hatching and a cycle starting again. A few flies that do creep out, we're just we'll just end up like the one yesterday. I captured it and I took it outside to the outdoor compost barrel where I know I've got a lot of black soldier flies, and I released them there. So that's how I am. All right, everyone, that's it for today's video. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, please remember to leave me a quick thumbs up. That's always really appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel too. That's really appreciated as well. All right, everyone, have a great day. Bye.